In the heart of the Mojave Desert, a lone female mechanic named Lena Whitaker stumbled upon an abandoned military base while searching for scrap. But what she found buried beneath the sand wasn't rust or ruin. It was a secret her father died protecting. This powerful story of how one female mechanic uncovered a hidden truth inside an abandoned military base will take you on a journey of courage, legacy, and the fire it takes to finish what others were forced to leave behind. But before we dive in, tell us, where are you watching from? We love seeing our global family in the comments. Let's get started. The wind howled through the skeletal remains of the Mojave outpost like a ghost mourning the past. Each gust rattled the rusted sheet metal and whispered secrets through broken windows. The desert stretched out in every direction, endless, bone dry, and forgotten. To most people, this place was a ruin, but to Lena Whitaker, it was something else entirely. She stood in the shadow of the old military hangar, one hand on the strap of her duffel, the other shielding her eyes from the sun. At 37, Lena wasn't the kind of woman people expected to see in places like this. Grease-stained overalls, calloused hands, hair tied back with a torn bandana, she looked like a mechanic straight out of a forgotten war film. And maybe in a way, she was. After losing both her parents, a mother who served in logistics and a father who vanished on deployment, Lena spent her life searching for purpose inside the engines of broken machines. Fixing things gave her control, order. And now, she was here, standing in front of an outpost no one had entered in decades. She thought she came for parts, but what she found would rewrite everything she believed about her past. The sun was beginning its slow descent when Lena Whitaker pushed open the rusted service door. It groaned like something ancient exhaling for the first time in decades. Dust swirled in the dry air, dancing through beams of fading sunlight. She stepped inside, her boots echoing off cracked concrete and forgotten silence. The old base was bigger than she expected. Long, empty corridors stretched into darkness, lined with peeling paint and broken signage. Authorized personnel only, radiation warning, restricted zone. Wires hung like vines from the ceiling. Faded red arrows still pointed toward long-defunct command centers and weapons storage. Somewhere deep inside, something tugged at her, not fear, not excitement, something heavier, familiar. She moved slowly, flashlight sweeping across the remnants of a world left behind. A broken monitor here, an old coffee mug still sitting on a desk there, coated in decades of dust. In one office, she found a filing cabinet jammed shut, rusted solid. Another room was lined with bunk beds, empty, but somehow still filled with the echoes of voices, laughter, shouting. She could almost hear boots pounding the floor, drills called out, radios crackling with orders. She kept walking. Deeper. There was no plan. She wasn't looking for treasure, or secrets, or ghosts. She just didn't want to go home. Not yet. After a while, she found a stairwell barely visible behind a fallen support beam. It descended sharply into darkness, the kind of place most people would turn away from. But Lena didn't flinch. She'd spent her life crawling under trucks, rebuilding engines in abandoned barns, searching through scrapyards. Darkness and grime were familiar friends. She tightened her grip on the flashlight and descended. Each step creaked, but held. The air grew colder, the silence deeper. At the bottom, she found a long corridor, half flooded, the light from her beam bouncing off murky water and rusted pipes. And then at the very end, a door. Unlike the others, this one wasn't damaged. It was sealed tight, military-grade steel, and unlike everything else in this place, It was clean, untouched by time. Her breath caught in her throat. Something about that door didn't feel abandoned. On the wall beside it, half hidden under a broken panel, was a small keypad. Most of the buttons had corroded, but one still blinked faintly, a green light, barely noticeable. She stared at it for a long time. Then, slowly, she reached out and touched it. The light turned red, then green again, and the door clicked. Just once, a single metallic breath. Then silence. Lena stepped back, heart pounding in her ears. Every instinct screamed at her to run. But something else, something older, quieter, told her to stay. Her mother's voice, maybe, or her father's. She had always wondered what happened to him. The letters had stopped coming one day when she was 13. No body, no answers, just silence. She took a breath and pulled the door open. It moved effortlessly, smooth hydraulics, still functioning after all these years. Behind it, a tunnel stretched downward. Dim lights flickered to life along the walls, as if sensing her presence. And at the end, barely visible, another door. She walked in slowly, the air cool and dry, smelling faintly of ozone. When she reached the second door, it slid open on its own. The room beyond made her freeze. It was a command center. Not a ruin, not a museum, operational. The lights buzzed softly. A row of monitors hummed to life. A console blinked, waiting. On one of the walls was a large digital map, not from 50 years ago, but current. She recognized satellite overlays, weather patterns, troop movements. All recent. This base wasn't abandoned. It had been hidden, carefully, intentionally. She stepped forward, drawn to the console. On the screen was a message. Simple, direct. "Welcome back, Captain Whitaker." Her knees buckled. She dropped into the nearest chair, hands trembling. Captain Whitaker. That was her father's rank. How did the system recognize her? Before she could react, one of the monitors blinked again, a video window opening. Grainy at first, then sharpening. And there he was. Her father. Alive. At least once. He looked older than in the photos she remembered. More tired. More real. He sat in the very same chair, in the very same room, speaking directly to the camera. "If you're seeing this, Lena, then I didn't make it home." Her breath caught. The world faded. All she could hear was his voice. "You weren't supposed to find this place. Not unless something went wrong. But if you're here, it means it's time. There's something I need you to finish." He paused, eyes shining. "You've always been the strong one, the one who fixes what others leave broken." A flicker of a smile. "Now I need you to fix something for me. Something bigger than either of us." The screen went black. The silence in the room wasn't empty anymore. It was waiting. The silence that followed her father's final words wasn't peaceful. It was heavy, like the moment before a storm breaks. Lena Whitaker sat frozen in the chair, her heart pounding loud enough to fill the room. The screen had gone black, but the weight of what she'd just seen hung in the air like smoke. Her father, gone, but not gone. He'd left this place, this message, and God only knew what else. For her, not for the military, not for the government, for his daughter, the mechanic, the girl who had spent her whole life trying to put broken things back together. She stood up slowly, knees still shaky, and turned in a slow circle, taking in the room. It looked like the kind of thing she'd seen in spy thrillers' walls lined with server towers, maps updating in real time, stacks of labeled hard drives in a fireproof case. There was a faint hum in the air, the sound of a machine that was alive, not a relic, not abandoned, active, and waiting. On the far side of the room, a second console began to glow. She stepped closer, and a prompt flickered onto the screen. Initiate protocol, severance authorization, required Whitaker DNA signature verified, voice command accepted. Her blood turned to ice. This wasn't just about old family secrets. This place was armed. There was something here, something important enough for her father to hide beneath a dead military outpost and protect with biometric locks. Lena didn't know what protocol severance meant, but the word alone made her stomach twist. She looked around again this time, truly seeing. Every inch of this bunker had been planned. Hidden tunnels, emergency power reserves, redundant systems, satellite uplink. It wasn't a hideout. It was a war room, and her father had built it without telling a soul. She backed away, her pulse climbing. Her father's face still lingered in her mind, tired, resolute. He had known he wouldn't make it back, and whatever had taken him, whatever made him record that message, was still out there. She turned toward the exit, suddenly needing open air. Sky. Anything other than the humming, watching walls. But before she could take a step, the lights flickered. Then a siren. Soft. At first. Then louder. On the central screen, red text flashed. Incoming signal unauthorized drone. Detected airspace compromised proximity, alert 3 miles and closing. Lena's breath hitched. She wasn't alone. Someone or something had found this place. Her father's voice rang in her ears. If you're here, it means it's time. She turned back to the main console, eyes scanning desperately for answers. And then she saw it tucked into a corner of the interface, a blinking green icon labeled Surveillance. She tapped it. The screen split into 6 panels, grainy footage from hidden exterior cameras. The rocky hillside, the dry riverbed, the service road, and then movement. Black figures moving with precision, military gear, suppressed rifles, not a rescue team, not search and rescue. They were here to erase something. Probably her. She stumbled back, cold sweat breaking across her forehead. Had they followed her here? Or had they been watching this place the whole time? Lena's mind raced. She had no weapons, no training, just a wrench in her backpack and an instinct for survival. This was a game she wasn't supposed to play. But then she saw the 4th screen camera feed of the armory. Her breath caught. The door was already open, as if someone had prepared it. Inside tactical gear, protective vests, encrypted comms, and weapons rifles, sidearms, crates of ammo, neatly arranged. Everything labeled in the same clean handwriting she remembered from old birthday cards. Her father had been preparing for this. Preparing for her. A low rumble above the distinct, muffled sound of a helicopter made the whole facility vibrate. Time was gone. Options were gone. Lena did what she'd always done. She acted. She ran to the armory, grabbing what she could, a lightweight vest, a flashlight-mounted sidearm, a military tablet, and a thick binder labeled Exposure. The first page showed photos blurred, black and white stills of what looked like clandestine operations. Seals from private military contractors, unmarked crates, government seals, and a logo she didn't recognize but somehow feared instinctively. This wasn't just about her father. This wasn't even about the military. It was something bigger. She shoved the binder into her pack and ran for the emergency stairwell. Above her, the sound of boots hit the gravel. Then voices, foreign, cold. Her hand found the hatch to the side tunnel her father had marked in the maps. She twisted the latch. It clicked open, and she dropped inside, sliding into the darkness just as a metal footstep echoed in the corridor behind her. Outside, the sun was setting. Inside, Lena Whitaker had just stepped into a war her father had died trying to stop. And now, she was the only one left to finish what he started. The air inside the escape tunnel was cold and stale, thick with the scent of metal, earth, and time. Lena Whitaker crawled forward in the dark, her shoulders scraping the narrow walls, her breath echoing louder than her thoughts. The clamor of boots and voices above had faded, but she could still feel them like thunderclouds gathering just out of sight. She had no idea where the tunnel led, but somehow, she trusted it. Her father had built this, every inch of it, and if he had left her this path, it was for a reason. After what felt like an eternity, the tunnel opened into a small, reinforced room no bigger than a supply closet. A metal hatch sat on the far wall, flanked by a dusty panel. Lena wiped it with her sleeve. The screen lit up instantly, and a quiet chime sounded. Secondary access verified? Welcome. Lena. Even now, that voice shook her. Not because it was mechanical, but because it had used her name with such gentle certainty, like someone who'd been waiting a long time for her to arrive. The hatch unsealed with a sigh of pressure and opened out to the desert night. The sky was vast and indigo. The wind had picked up. She crouched low and moved through the rocks, keeping to the shadows, ears alert. In the distance, she could hear the faint thrum of a rotor, a drone or a chopper, and below it, the unmistakable sound of a team sweeping the bunker she'd just escaped. They were inside now, and they weren't going to leave until everything was gone. Lena crouched behind a boulder and pulled the binder from her pack, the one labeled Exposure. She flipped through the first few pages again, trying to make sense of it all. Coordinates, surveillance photos, internal memos. They were copies of documents that no one was ever supposed to see. There were pages marked Oasis Project, and others referencing PMC Blackground, a name that triggered a vague memory. She remembered seeing it once in a footnote on a military invoice she had repaired years ago for a private security company. The page had been redacted almost completely. She hadn't thought twice about it back then. Now she realized they had been hiding something enormous. Her father hadn't just discovered classified information. He'd uncovered a network private companies funneling illegal weaponry, off-the-books operations, shadow wars fought without congressional oversight. And he had tried to stop it. That's why he disappeared. He hadn't vanished. He had been erased. Lena's hands trembled, but not from fear, from clarity. Her whole life, she had felt ordinary. Just a mechanic. Just a girl who grew up in a house with oil-stained floors and half-eaten MREs for dinner. She had patched up engines, welded broken frames, tuned carburetors by ear. She knew torque specs better than she knew people. But now she understood. All of it had prepared her for this. The bunker, the tech. The system her father had built, it was mechanical at its core, military grade. Yes, encrypted, of course. But at its foundation, it was a machine, and machines, she understood. She flipped to the last few pages of the binder. There, scrawled in her father's handwriting, was a simple note. If they come, don't fight them head-on. Follow the current, stay off the grid, and when you're ready, burn the mask. It ended with a set of coordinates and a single line underlined twice. The switchboard is the key. She didn't know what it meant yet, but she knew what she had to do. Back in the distance, a muffled explosion echoed from the bunker entrance. Dust mushroomed into the air. They were destroying it, erasing every piece of her father's legacy, every file, every blueprint, every log. And if she hadn't escaped when she did, they would have buried her too. Lena stared at the smoke curling against the starlit sky. For years, she'd grieved a man she couldn't bury. Now she grieved a world he had built, one she barely had time to understand before it was ripped away. But she wasn't broken. Not this time. By morning, Lena had found a quiet place far outside the perimeter, an old ranger's station that looked like it hadn't been used in years. She accessed the military tablet she'd taken from the armory, booted it up, and began sorting through the encrypted drives her father had left behind. Most of the files were locked, buried behind layers of code and logic puzzles only someone like him, or maybe someone like her, could solve. And in the background of it all was one repeating line of code embedded deep, like a heartbeat. Not all soldiers wear uniforms. Not all wars are fought with bullets. This is for her. She'll know what to do. Tears welled in her eyes, but she didn't wipe them away. She let them fall in silence while her fingers began the work. That night, as the desert cooled around her and the world moved on, oblivious, Lena Whitaker stopped being a mechanic and started becoming something more. It took Lena Whitaker 3 days to piece together enough of the system to understand what she was sitting on. She barely slept. The ranger's outpost she'd taken shelter in had no power, no running water. But that didn't matter. She had her father's encrypted tablet, a satellite uplink buried deep in the software, and a duffel full of military-grade batteries he had left behind. All she needed now was time and quiet. Inside the tablet were fragments, not files, not pictures, but breadcrumbs. He hadn't stored the truth in one place, he had scattered it like landmines across the globe. Ghost data, piggybacking on old defense satellite pings, logs embedded in weather telemetry, audio files disguised as static in emergency frequencies. It was brilliant and maddening. And pure Whitaker. Each time she unlocked a node, the system would unlock a sliver more of her father's voice, like he was leading her across time, like he was still guiding her. "If you're decoding this," his voice whispered in one file, "then they didn't wipe it all. You're smarter than I was, or at least more patient. Either way, good. You'll need both." Lena smiled despite the ache in her bones. She wasn't sure what she had expected to find when she stepped into that dead base, but it hadn't been this. A mission. A chance to finish what he started. By day 4, she had reassembled enough of the intelligence packets to realize that the bunker was never meant to be the final stage. It was just the switchboard, the connection point, the amplifier. The real weapon was hidden elsewhere. Coordinates embedded in the final decoded file pointed to an industrial site just outside of Flagstaff, Arizona, a long-abandoned data center that had once served as a storage node for government emergency communications during the Cold War. No one had touched it in decades. No one, except him. She stared at the blinking cursor on the screen. It was a risk. Going there meant exposing herself, moving through populated areas, surveillance, facial recognition, cameras on every gas pump and freeway. But staying hidden wasn't an option anymore. Not after what she'd seen in the last unlocked video. A meeting, somewhere in Eastern Europe, unmarked vans, corporate execs shaking hands with militia leaders, and behind it all the black-ground PMC insignia, bold and untouched. Her father's voice narrated the footage. "They're not contractors. They're architects. They engineer chaos to feed their contracts. The war never ends because they keep it alive. I thought I could expose them quietly. I was wrong. It wasn't a conspiracy theory. It was documented treason. And now, Lena was the only person alive who had the full puzzle. She moved at night, avoided highways, swapped license plates with a junker she passed along an old service road. She remembered the tricks her dad used to teach her when she was a teenager, how to pull the battery from a burner phone so it couldn't ping towers, How to recognize when someone was tailing you not by the car, but by the pattern. Paranoia was a new language, and she was becoming fluent. When she finally arrived at the site outside Flagstaff, she half expected it to be gone. Bulldozed. Wiped. But there it was, low concrete walls, a faded Department of Energy placard, and a rusted gate hanging off its hinges. She climbed over without hesitation. The air inside the data facility was stale, dry, and too quiet. No signs of recent movement. Just what her father would have wanted. It took her 6 hours to find the failsafe. It was buried beneath the server floor, hidden behind a false panel under what looked like a decommissioned terminal. She pried it open with the back end of a wrench. Dust coughed up into the beam of her flashlight. Inside was a sealed container. Heavy. Cold. Lena opened it slowly and found the drive. Military grade, hardened, no markings. Taped to it, yellowed and curling with age, was a note. Her father's handwriting. If you've made it this far, you're not just my daughter anymore. You're the last Whitaker soldier. This is the kill switch. Her hands trembled. Beneath the note, a second card. Handwritten instructions. Upload from a public node. Encrypted. Dead man's protocol. If they catch you, it releases anyway. This wasn't just exposure. This was detonation. And Lena had just pulled the pin. She stared at the drive, sitting in her lap like it might start humming. It was small, unassuming, and yet she knew it could bring down a billion-dollar network built on lies, blood, and silence. She had a choice. She could vanish again, disappear into the desert with her secrets and let the machine keep turning. Or she could take the next step, risk everything, and strike the match. Lena looked up at the broken ceiling. Through the crack, dawn was breaking soft, warm light touching the dust like the desert was holding its breath. And she knew. Her life, her old life, was gone. But something new had just begun. She slid the drive into her jacket and walked toward the rising sun. The drive was warm against Lena's chest, tucked inside a weatherproof pouch beneath her jacket, pulsing like a second heartbeat. By the time she reached the edge of town, the sun had risen, fully burning through layers of early morning haze. She parked the borrowed truck in the back lot of a roadside diner, changed into a clean set of clothes, and washed the desert off her hands in a cracked porcelain sink. The face in the mirror wasn't the same one she'd seen just a week ago. The lines were the same, the freckles, the short, wind-whipped hair, but something behind the eyes had changed. There was steel now. She found a public library 2 blocks down. The building was half renovated, tucked between an abandoned pawn shop and a vape store with tinted windows. Inside, everything smelled faintly of old paper, dust, and lemon disinfectant. She sat at a terminal in the back, facing the wall. Her fingers hovered over the keyboard for a long time. Not from fear, but from weight. She wasn't just uploading evidence. She was burning the world down. The drive was programmed to split the files across a dozen outlets, international watchdogs, independent journalists, whistleblower sites, redundant protocols, delayed timers, AI auto-releases. Even if someone shut it down halfway, the damage would still ripple outward. Her father's voice echoed in her memory, low and resolute. Information is power, but truth is a weapon. Don't let it rot in the dark. She slid the drive into the USB slot. The screen blinked, then flickered. Transfer initiated, 14 minutes remaining. She didn't move. Didn't look away. Outside the library window, birds landed on the rusted railing. A child rode past on a bicycle. A man yelled at a parking meter. The world continued, utterly unaware that the ground beneath it was shifting. Lena leaned back, closed her eyes, and let the silence hold her. She was ready. They came 6 minutes later. She felt it before she saw it, a pressure in the air, like a storm cell pushing into a quiet valley. 2 men. Suits, comms in their ears, the kind of posture you couldn't fake, practiced, precise, predatory. They didn't barge in. They entered like customers, like they belonged. But she knew. One of them brushed past her aisle, glanced her way once. Too casual. Her hand slid slowly to the power switch on the terminal. She didn't press it. The drive was programmed to continue the upload, even if removed. Her father had built every safeguard. She just had to let it finish. 9 minutes remaining. Lena stood, calm, slow. She walked past the front desk, out through the front doors. She didn't run. Running was for people who didn't know what came next. She walked into the alley beside the library and disappeared into a maze of fire escapes and utility stairwells. The tracker in her jacket buzzed once a silent ping from the secondary drive. Upload successful. By sundown, it was everywhere. Encrypted documents leaked to journalists in 5 countries. Surveillance footage aired on news sites across Europe and the US. Bank transfers, audio logs, contracts, satellite maps. The name Blackground PMC was no longer whispered, it was shouted. And for the first time in her life, Lena watched the world shake, because she had moved it. She spent the next week on the move, never staying in one town longer than a day. Not because she was running, but because she didn't want the story to become about her. This wasn't about Lena Whitaker. It was about what her father uncovered, what he sacrificed everything for, and what she had been brave enough to finish. But in the quiet moments, gas stations, truck stops, motel balconies, she began to feel something she hadn't in years. Pride. Not the loud, boastful kind. The quiet, rooted kind. The kind that came from walking through fire and not only surviving but carrying something out with you. On the 10th day, she found herself back in the Mojave, back near the place where it all began. The base was gone, buried under rubble and red tape. The desert had reclaimed it, like it always did. She stood on the ridge as the wind blew through the Joshua trees. In her hand was a small steel box, the last piece of the drive, sealed inside. She knelt in the dust and buried it beneath a pile of stones. Not to hide it, but to mark the end. This wasn't her battlefield anymore. She had done her part. The war was no longer hers to fight. That night, she sat alone by a fire, a small rusted kettle bubbling on the flame. The stars burned bright above her, and the silence felt different now. Not hollow, not empty, but full. She looked up at the sky and whispered, "I did it, Dad." And for the first time in her life, she believed he heard her. The fire had died down to embers when Lena Whitaker finally allowed herself to rest. She leaned back against a smooth boulder, arms folded, eyes fixed on the stars above. They blinked and shimmered with quiet indifference, just as they had the night she arrived at the base, and every night before that. But she was no longer the same woman who stared up in silence, searching for answers in the dark. No, Lena was no longer looking for answers. She had become one. Across the world, her father's story had spread like wildfire. News stations scrambled to catch up. Lawmakers called for investigations. Whistleblowers came forward. Blackground PMC had vanished into the shadows, but not before losing every layer of corporate protection they'd built. The network had cracked wide open. Names were exposed, deals canceled, arrests made. And through it all, one name remained absent. Lena Whitaker. She had made sure of it. No photos, no fingerprints. Every breadcrumb she'd left was about the truth, not the messenger. Her father had taught her that. If you want to make change, don't seek the spotlight. Be the one who fixes the engine while the world keeps moving. She had spent her whole life doing exactly that, turning bolts, patching fuel lines, restoring things others had thrown away. But it wasn't until now that she realized she hadn't just inherited her father's hands. She had inherited his mission. Days passed, then a week, then 2. Lena stayed in the desert, not hiding, just breathing. It was strange how peace didn't come all at once. It came in pieces, in the way the wind moved across the dunes, in the silence that didn't feel empty anymore, in the fire she built each night, not because she needed warmth, but because it reminded her she was still here. She spent her time fixing up a rusted motorcycle she'd found behind an old service station. Something about it felt fitting. A machine half forgotten, waiting for someone to believe it still had a purpose. Each day, she wiped away the years, one bolt at a time. On the 15th morning, a letter arrived, tucked under a rock by her fire pit. No return address. Just a symbol, a silver crescent over a black mountain. She unfolded it slowly. The message inside was brief. "We know what you did. You're not alone. If you ever need a way back and use the key..." Taped to the bottom of the page was a sleek black flash drive. No labels. No markings. Lena stared at it for a long moment, then slid it into her vest without a word. She didn't need to know who sent it. Not yet. The world had changed, and so had she. That night, she sat beside her fire one last time. She thought about the road ahead. There was no map for it, no command center, no encrypted drives. Just choices. Just direction. But for the first time in years, she wasn't afraid of what came next. She packed light, just the motorcycle, a canteen, a toolkit, and a notebook filled with coordinates and sketches. Before sunrise, she rolled the bike out onto the open desert. She kicked the starter once, then again. The engine sputtered, coughed, and then roared to life. She smiled. It still worked. She didn't leave a note. Didn't mark the campsite. The desert would take it all back in time. That was its way. That was okay. The only trace she left behind was a small stone she placed atop the boulder where she'd first sat, watching the stars. Etched into it with her knife were 3 letters. LW? For Lena, for her father, for the legacy they now shared. As she rode across the horizon, wind in her face, the engine humming beneath her, Lena wasn't running from anything anymore. She was riding towards something. A world that needed fixing, stories that needed exposing, and maybe people who needed someone like her, someone who didn't seek the glory, only the truth. A mechanic with a soldier's heart, a daughter who became the message, a woman who had every reason to disappear, and chose to stand up instead. Somewhere, out there, another truth was waiting, and Lena Whitaker was on her way to find it. Anyone can rebuild what's broken if they're willing to get their hands dirty and trust the spark in their gut. As the desert wind whispered across the Mojave sands, Lena Whitaker tightened the last bolt on the old motorcycle and zipped her jacket. But she wasn't fixing it for herself. She was fixing it for the road ahead, for every quiet voice that had ever been silenced, every truth that had been buried, and every daughter who was told, "It's not your fight." She knew now the mission her father left behind didn't die with him. It lived in her, and it lives in all of us who dare to act, when no one's watching. The mechanic who once believed her life was small became the woman who made the world listen. Because for Lena, and for those who will rise after her, the silence was never the end. It was only the ignition. The end? Up next, 2 more powerful stories are waiting for you. Click to ride with us and hit subscribe if you believe truth deserves a voice.